Hey there, everybody. I am here with the Green Glyphs rune set, and I'm really excited to be talking about this one because um, they have actually hit a certain milestone. If you're watching this in the future, there was a Kickstarter for the Green Glyphs, and if you're watching this now, the Kickstarter is going on, and they've reached a milestone and unlocked adding the full Anglo Saxon rune set, which makes this much more appealing to me and to some others. Let me zoom out here actually for a minute. So the originally, and what I'm going to show you today is the Elder Futhark set. So this is just a one sheet, has everything, as I do, that has a full Anglo-Saxon rune set to it. The Elder Futhark has the first 3/8 that we have here, and then the Anglo-Saxon, there's actually a number of different Anglo-Saxon or Northumbrian runes that were added on for the shift in language. The runes, so just as a quick synopsis, right? The runes are the alphabet of the especially the Elder Futhark is the alphabet for the Proto-Germanic language. And so the runes, there are several different iterations of the runes based on as they moved to different areas and as language shifted and changed in the Germanic languages, there were less runes, more runes, depending on the shifts in the languages that were being used, that were using the runes. So the Anglo-Saxon runes shifted some of the sounds, added some more sounds on to be able to accommodate the language that they were representing. So the original, sorry, there's OMs on the back, which are the Celtic version, right, of the Germanic runes. But I don't mean that that's a one-to-one, but what I mean is as the runes are to the Germanic speakers, so are the OMs to the Celtic, Old Irish, another Celtic speaking world. That's my poor way of trying to say that. But my point is that the Elder Futhark, which we often see in divinatory sets, are the oldest. It's the Proto-Germanic in which the others sort of grew and or downsized from, because the younger Futhark actually loses sounds and loses letters. So what I'm going to show you today are the Elder Futhark, but again, because they have reached a certain milestone and it has been requested, they've expanded it to the Anglo-Saxon. And I'm really excited about this because I've been teaching runes for a while, and every fall we dive back into the runes to try to look at it from a different way and just grow deeper and deeper with our connection and working with them. And last year we added in and went through and dove into the full Anglo-Saxon set. And for the first time, because I've read the Elder Futhark since the 90s, and I was always interested. I thought it was cool to see the Anglo-Saxon, but it wasn't anything that I utilized. But ever since last fall, I've just been full on. I can't see myself going back from the Anglo-Saxon, and there aren't actually a lot of Anglo-Saxon decks, and or they're harder to find also in runes that you can find them, but they're definitely harder to find than the Elder Futhark sets for divination, for casting, and things of that nature. So it was really a treat because I don't actually use a lot of decks with runes. I generally cast, but over the last year I've just done a lot of 3 pulls, either with a larger rune set, Anglo-Saxon rune set that I have, or and I haven't really until recently with a card set, and so I'm excited that that is where this is going. So we'll come back to this in a second when we talk a little bit more about it, but I did want to point that out, that while we are looking at the Elder Futhark, when this actually comes out, because this is a prototype, when this comes out, it will have the full Anglo Saxon, including the dice, which we will talk about in a minute when we get there. Again, this is part of the set. You can either get it in a full set or you can get it separately. I will put links to the full set videos as well, and to the separately and to the Kickstarter below. And it matches, everything kind of goes together. You have a similar little guidebook that we have seen with the other ones. We have a note from Mr. Eads. We have a welcome to the runes, talks about this being starting as a take on the Elder Futhark runes. Each of the card has the runic symbol, the traditional name, and an image that encompasses the meaning behind the symbol. He talks about reading with the runes and stringing them together, and gives some examples of how you can string those runes together. Gives a couple of spreads. We have past, present, and future. We have with an example, we have a 4 rune reading of the seasons. And I think there's a 5 rune. Yeah, 5 runes and beyond, sort of stringing them together. Gives you an example of the cards and what we will see, which we'll look at the cards in a second. And also talks about how in his whole set, minus the Oracle, he utilizes this color palette to emphasize also the understanding of whether they are leaning more towards the difficult cards or to the positive cards or to neutral cards. So the cards are color coded with reds and oranges signifying misfortune, yellows and golds signifying good fortune and positivity, and then greens and even some blues leaning into more the neutral color palette. Now, there are definitely misfortune runes, right? But for me, all of the runes have the inherent powers in them that can be used in any different degrees. But I do think that this helps in looking at the runes and seeing sort of where those more unfortunate or misfortunate or can lean more in that direction. But what I really like about the color palette is here where it can touch into that. It doesn't overwhelm the card or kind of force you to only see it in that way, because I don't approach, I mean, I do utilize shadows and in runic work, but I'm also using it a lot as where does their power lie, sort of how can we tap into that rune and gain power, and those are more neutral energies. And so I don't feel as if the color palette, while it gives that cue in if you want to go in that direction, it doesn't skew it, which I think is very great, because you've got that if you want to tap into it, but it doesn't skew the runes so that you're kind of forced to read it in one particular way, which I particularly appreciate. Then he goes into the sets of 8. So runes come in sets of 8. You have 3 in the Elder Futhark. You have 3 sets of 8. He gives you a little bit about how those might work together. I use Freya's 8 in the first one rather than Frey's, and so there are different ways of approaching it. You also have, so that's the first 8. So they function kind of like suits. You have Hagel's, or also you'll see it as Heimdall's 8. And then you have, in the Elder Futhark, you have Tyr's 8 as well. They're kind of named after who's associated with the first rune of the sets of 8. And then, of course, with the Anglo Saxon, there's another set of 8 that are added into them. And so for those, I use as a breakdown Freya's 8, Heimdall's 8, Tyr's 8, and I just call it Yggdrasil's 8, but with the oak tree here and sort of that tree, a set of tree 8s, even though they're not all trees. That is not a traditional breakdown. That's just what I have done with them. And so once he adds in, obviously, the other 8 cards, of which I've seen, I think, 6 of the cards, and they look, of course, fantastic as the rest of the deck does. So he talks about that in in each one of the 8s. And then much like we've seen with the other guidebooks, you have a pretty stripped down. You have the rune, you have the name, you have a pronunciation. Again, there are different ways to spell. There are different names on some of the runes across different sources. There are certainly different pronunciations. The Elder Futhark especially was a Proto-Germanic. It's at sort of the heart of what then sprouted into all the different Germanic languages, and we do not know exactly how they were pronounced. Scholars debate it. Because of course it shifted and changed it when it shifted into Icelandic or again into Anglo-Saxon, the sounds and the things changed, right? The oldest source that we have is the Anglo-Saxon rune poem. And of course that is far later than the runes were actually being used, especially the Elder Futhark. So even the scholars, not divinatory scholars, but like language scholars, are going to have some disagreements on how, and or just say this is the best approximation that we can come to based on the knowledge that we have. So just because somebody says something differently than you might say it, doesn't necessarily mean they are wrong. They have just landed in a particular place. Most people will come to, I certainly sat down and thought, okay, where am I going to land? Listening to a couple different scholars and getting the best approximation that where I've just decided to land at, right? And so that is might look different than the way you might have landed, and his might look different than the way you might have landed, but that's just because there's no 100% agreement on how the Elder Futhark runes were pronounced. So, but I like that he gives, I haven't actually looked at those really closely to see Thorazaz, I say Thorazaz, Anzus, these look pretty close. Uruz, Fehu, Raido, Kenaz, I say Kenaz, that's just, again, the way that I either learned it. Gabo, Unyo, so sound looks pretty similar. Hagalaz, Naudis, here we have Isa, Yera, Ehwaz, Pertho. So this one I do as algaes. Again, there are different ways of approaching this. They have as Ehwaz, Sowolo, let's see, Tiwaz, Berkana, Ehwaz, or instead of, I pronounce this as Ehwaz, where you have Ehwaz. I think he has them swapped in how he does it. Again, this isn't, I like that the pronunciation is there. You just have to go. I'll put a link. There is a scholar, not a divination scholar, but there is a scholar named Peter Jackson, who is a Norse scholar. And he does a video on sort of explaining how, the sounds and the way people choose to pronounce them are different because, again, people are just doing their best approximations. And so I pretty much landed where he has. I think maybe I can't remember if I have a couple that may be a little bit different based on how I learned it. But that's kind of where I've landed. This doesn't make this wrong. I like that he gives a pronunciation, so we know where he's landing from. Lagus, Ingwaz, Dagas, and Othala is how I pronounce them. But obviously on the card itself, there isn't anything to show that, so you can pronounce it how you pronounce it. The only one, obviously, that for me is different is with algaes. And we'll get to that when we go through it. And that's not wrong. It's just where he decided to land with that. So that's what we have here. And then we have the dice. What I love about the dice, now mine are just a sample set, and they didn't come with done correctly. So these are 3 of the same dice. But what these are 8-sided dice. so that you have one from each of the eights. Now, I'm not a huge fan of generally of working with dice with runes because you can never have Dagas and Ingwas show up in the same reading when you do it because they're on the same eight. So in terms of a full-fledged, reading, I prefer a whole deck of cards to shuffle or the whole set of runes to cast, right? Because then Dagas and Ingwas can come up together, right? Or Manas can come up with Berkana, which it could never do on this particular dice. But what these are nice for is understanding your 4 sets of 8. Well, we're going to get to the other one in a second. Your 3 sets of 8s, right? And so understanding as a suit what each of those come up with, and then doing a reading where you have one from each of the 8s, which I think is really awesome for that, for that limited purpose. I also just love dice, and I love the feel of these dice. So these are adding on an extra, so you have the 3 8s, and then I believe it's a D10 because you have the 4 8s in Anglo Saxon runes, but you also have Gar, which kind of stands stands in the middle, and all the rest of the runes goes around. It's like an axis, right? It's Odin or Woden's spear, and it stands as that sort of axis that all of the energies swirl around. So there's a D10 that has the 8 plus the Gar rune, which is part of the Anglo-Saxon or Northumbrian runes. And then I think the blank one, he's just going to either put as a blank space or some sort of symbol that you could use as unknown, or you could play with that in different ways. So I believe that's how he's approaching it. But again, you can go take a look at the Kickstarter. But in the end, there'll be the 3 D8s and 1 D10. And so that's pretty cool. And how you can utilize them. Again, they're so heavy and weighted. I think, again, for doing those as sort of positions, where for me, Freya's 8 as the essentials for life, the things that we need for life, and then you would use the rune that comes up with that. For Heimdall, 8 for me, again, that's how I look at them. It's force and power of nature and the mind, and so you would roll about, that would be the position, well, what rune came up. Tears 8 is about justice and self-sacrifice, what comes up in that position. And then for me, again, this is not traditional, this is just me, Yggdrasil's 8, or the extra runes of the Anglo-Saxon runes, are about connections and cycles and rituals, and so then you would be rolling on that. So I think it would be almost like a spread set of runes, which I think is cool. And again, I just love dice, and especially metal heavy weighted dice, so I love the way these look and the way these feel. So that is that. Now these come separately in the Kickstarter. You can get the deck, and then you can do an add-on currently in the Kickstarter. How those are going to be sold afterwards, you'll have to look and see. But for the Kickstarter, I think these were an add-on that you could do as well. So take a look. Again, I'll have links below. So let's go back here where I was trying to talk about how, again, this is similar to all of the little books in the set of the Green Glyph set. You've got the rune, you've got the word, how he's landed with what name he's chosen, the pronunciation, a bit of history. For example, this is Thurazaz. Thurazaz translates to thorn and references Norse mythology, specifically the god Thor and his battle against the giants with his legendary hammer. Thurazaz is the thorn of life, but it is also the hammer that thuds and offers deafening silence so that you may hear the truth. The keywords that he has are disruption, misfortune, judgment, and self-preservation. And for the Merc staff, which is basically like the reversal or the shadow aspect, he has a return to normalcy, vulnerable, lowered guard, and pain. Obviously, whether you use Merc staff or reversal type readings with runes are entirely up to you. I do not in general, and that's simply because there are runes that if you reverse them, nothing happens because they'll look the exact same. So I don't do it with OMs either. color, you know, like a Gabo, for example, wouldn't look any different. Isa wouldn't look any different. Ehwaz wouldn't look any different. So when there are ones that won't change, then I don't see them as having been used with reversals. That's just where I land. Again, you can do you however you choose to do you, but he does give you some shadow aspects, so that if, let's say, it turns up in a position that's shadow, or you're just by nature of the question, like what is disrupting what I'm trying to do, you have some keywords into that shadow aspect there. So that's nice to have there. So that's what we have with the guidebook. Well, let's take a look at the cards themselves. Did I already shuffle them or just have one out of order? I think I just have the one. Okay, so let's zoom in on the cards themselves. Again, beautiful. It's like I try to describe this with the other decks. In person, it has sort of a not overly bright gold, almost like a vintage gold, but then it has an iridescence look to it that's hard to pick up. I think it kind of picks up, but it's really pretty because it does have a flash of this iridescent, but at the same time, it's not like a bright yellowy gold. So I think it's really pretty, actually, on the side that we have there. The backs are, again, meant to be able to mix in. They all look very similar, but they are utilizing the symbols of they're mixed in the symbols. So you can see the darker ones are the actual rune symbols or the glyphs, right? And so, of course, in this, where all the other decks would have their special glyph next to the name, this has the name plus the glyph is the actual rune. But then we also have the rune larger, which I love because I don't really like rune decks in which it doesn't stand out at all what the actual rune is, which is the whole point, right? The image is just supporting the rune. So you want to be very clear what the rune is. So I really like that has happened there. Okay, so here we have Fehu. We have a cow here. It's more of the domesticated cow image, which makes sense. This is about wealth and those types of energies of wealth that you can own, abundance, these types of energies here, right? Here we have Uruz, which is more of a wild ox or an auroch. I don't know how you pronounce that. But this is more of, you stumbled into a field and you are faced by this challenge of this wild beast here. And it tends to help. The rune can be used to bolster our energy and our determination to face a challenge that might be ahead. Again, this is kind of the green and blue tone, like a greeny blue, but that is meant to be more neutral, right? Because it's going to help you to face a challenge, although this could be seen as a challenging rune. Here we have Thurazaz, which we've already read. Again, I do like some of if you look closely, there are glyphs, not runes, but glyphs on his horns. You can see glyphs on the actual hammer. He has the thorns and the Thor's hammer, depending on how you approach that. Thurazaz for me is that sort of poke. It's definitely a difficult card, but it can also be that like kick in the pants and that poke to get you moving forward. So we have that there. Now here we have Anzus, and this is an interesting form. And there are different forms to the runes. And again, I've seen people do rune, sort of rune walkthroughs of other decks and things, and they'll sometimes be like, oh, they've got this wrong. There are, again, different forms of the rune. So the form of the rune that I've always used with Anzus, now As is for the Anglo Saxon, but Anzus looks more like this, right? Like an actual, it looks like an F, to be honest, is what we normally see Anzus as. What I like about the way that he's done this is it does kind of bring it more into the A, looking more like an A. And so that's interesting to have that in that form. But again, remember, these don't have to necessarily be right or wrong. It's just there are different forms, and that has happened across time. We can see that there are runes on it. We have Breath with the Thurzaz, and then another E at the end. And I think he does put right in the front here where you can have how you would utilize that to spell words out if you wanted to translate them with the Anglo Saxon words. So you can see that you would use that for the E, and so that would make that into spelling out breathe, if that makes sense. And again, that makes sense because Anzu speaks to the mouth and to breathing life into things by the power of the word, right? So that makes sense. I don't know why I keep reaching up there. Next we have Raido. I'm going to skip it. Somehow little decks, I don't know, I just do better just picking him up. So here we go. Please excuse my poor ripped skin there. Here we have Raido. A lot of times now we'll see this associated with a wagon or with a wheel, although there is certainly some traditions of thinking about it riding a horse, although for me that would be much more associated with Ehwaz. But it's more about the journey and the road. It's the journey that you're on, but also like the road that you're on, and transporting and moving. So this works fine. Here we have Kenaz with the also Kauna. I learned it as Kauna, so I will just alternate between Kauna and Kenaz. And you'll also see some different ways of drawing this, but the figure. But this is I like the match here. I like the spark of light that you have here. It's illumination, but it's also burning. Like you can get boils and get burned with fire. So there's a lot of mixed energy there. Here we have Gabo. This is a gift, but it's also much more about the actual act of giving, which is quite beautiful. Again, you've got the yellow for the positivity here. We have Wunyo for joy. Very joyous, again, very much in the art style of the green glyphs, and it looks joyous, which I love. Here we have Hagalaz. I know that looks more like an N, but it's an H, and it's Hagala. And again, that's not due to Mr. Eads, but the rune itself kind of looks like an N if you're not looking closely. But that is Hagalaz. We have this orange. Hagalaz is danger. It is hail, but it also has with it that powerful energy of transformation. So it is disruption, but there is this power of change. The water is changing form into something hard. There's also big creation myths surrounding ice and fire, and so it's quite a powerful rune there. Nowadays is the rune of need. It means need, but it's also about the healing that comes when we do the work to overcome that, which is quite powerful. Here we have Isa, which is ice. As we can see, it's quite a thing of beauty. It's also something that's very dangerous. It speaks to water in its more static form or stasis, something frozen in time, versus Laguz, which has water in its moving form that we have. It's a beautiful card here. So it's water, but in its more static form, but they're still shifting. It's a slow shifting. There's some beautiful videos on YouTube by Jona Yenten, I believe. She's a Swedish creator who has a beautiful channel on sort of the deep woods of Sweden, and she every year in the winter she will make recordings of the sound of ice as it shifts and moves. That just is so powerful. I highly recommend you going to listen to them. Here we have Yera, which is the year, but it's kind of broken into two in the understandings here. And it's, but also more about like a full cycle or reaching harvest. Harvest isn't just about that time. It's the full cycle that brings about the harvest. So we have Yera. Again, for me, this rune, I pronounce as Ehwaz, and that's just how I've learned it. It's associated with the yew tree, so I do like the tree being here. Some people associate the yew tree with the world tree. Of course, other people can make a case for ash trees, as well as some people will make a case for oak trees. So they're all powerful trees. But I like the image that's here because it really does speak to transitions and regeneration. And so I think this is a great image for the rune. Here we have Pertho, which is one of those mystery runes that they don't really know exactly what it was associated with. Often you see it associated with a game piece in some way. So you think about having a bag of dice to do gaming with, coming together to tell stories and play games with other people is how I utilize it. What did I do with the book? We'll see, so this bag works fine for me because it does look like a bag instead of a gaming cup. It could be like a game, but I always think of it sort of like a Yahtzee cup that you would have dice in to shake. He has the true meaning of Pertho has been debated for millennia as it seems to have been lost in time. Some believe it represents gaming and the rune resembles a dice cup on its side. Others link Pertho to the unknown forces and mysteries of life. So yeah. So I think it's a great image there. I like the elements that are here. Again, I utilize this as algaes, right? Again, there are other names as well that can be here. It is associated, some people associate with the elk, or elk sedge is what it's I associate it to, which is actually a type of plant that is prickly and is often used for protection, sort of setting up protection. The elk on here to me works perfectly fine. I like the antlers here. It's certainly easy to tell what that is. Sowilo we have as, which is also sigil in the Anglo Saxon, but this is associated to the sun, so this is really beautiful. Here we have Ehwaz. This is associated to the god Tyr, and honor and glory and justice, and so the sword hilt here I think is really powerful. Here we have Berkana, which is to do with birth and new beginnings and birch trees. But this kind of birth and fresh beginnings, I think, works really beautifully. This is so beautiful. I love that the horse really does stand out because I was kind of like, oh, you're really going to maybe see the horse and rider here. Although to me, this really is focused on the road or the journey. And this does really stand out with sort of the horse. I would have loved almost to see the horse and rider because it does speak to partnership and that coming together. But I love that the horse stands out here really beautifully. Here we have Manas, which I think is gorgeous. This is speaking to what it means to be human in the most powerful way. Not in we often see the negative ways of what it means to be human, but this is about us being at our best. Think of it as two people facing each other and they're each holding each other's waist is how I think one of the books of runes that I have that describes sort of what the symbols might look like has said, and that always has stuck with me, which I think is quite beautiful. Again, I love this image. I think it's really beautiful and it shows the movement of water that Lagu speaks to. Ehwaz, I love this as well. This is sort of associated with the god Ing, which is a god of fertility. And so having that sort of seed here and fertile things growing, I think works really, really well there. It's quite beautiful. Dagas we have as sort of the dawn. It's daybreak, it's dawn, it's messages that are coming to us. And this is really beautiful with the breaking dawn here. And then I think this is really interesting and beautiful. Othala, I would have thought this would be a house or a home. I will read the things on this, or even like a fireplace, because this is said to, if you think about a fireplace and the hearth right here. So I think it's an interesting choice of images, although thinking of the world tree and that sort of everything coming home to the tree makes sense to me, but it's definitely how different than how, but I do see, you know, with the lineage here and this idea of our inheritance or our family tree, it makes sense having the tree there. Othla or the Odal rune translates to lineage or heritage. It is a final rune. Again, how you put the Dagas and Othla get swapped. I have them going Othla then Dagas, but you see them going the other way as well, and I don't personally care. You can make a case for it either way. It is the final rune in the Elder Futhark and encapsulates all aspects of our origin. It takes into account the good and the bad that we enter into this life with. So this works for me, and I use powers for each of the runes, and for Othla, my power is the power to root, and so that makes perfect sense to me as well. So I like the image there, even though, again, a lot of times you'll see a home or a hearth fire or something like that. This makes a lot of sense. Think about the roots and our roots of where we come from. So that's what we have for the cards. I think they're beautifully done. I've again seen some of the Anglo-Saxon ones that he's already done. You can follow the link to the Kickstarter that will be below this video. And he's put up in the update section, he's put up some of the images. I think there's 6 of them. There may be all of them there now, but at the time that I made this, there were 6 of them that you could see. So again, there's very few full Anglo-Saxon. Actually, I don't know. I have an expansion to my Oracle Place with them, but I can't think of a Elder Futhark, or an Anglo-Saxon rune set of cards. I know there is one. I've got one sort of niggling at my brain, but I cannot think of it at the moment. Regardless, there's very few. So I am definitely super stoked that those have been added in. Again, the color palette in all of these green glyphs are so beautiful, right? They're muted, they're limited color palette. The colors are giving you an idea of the energy of the cards behind it. So just glancing at this, you see a lot of joy with some disruption in the middle of that, right? That is interesting, especially when you're talking about sort of the gift of giving with no recompense, knowing that you might actually gain some difficulty from that, actually leading to great joy, I think is an interesting message here. But you can literally see that flow and disruption of energy through the colors that are there, which I think is fantastic. So really excited. I think it's quite beautiful. Again, this is one I am ordering a set of for myself because they have the full Anglo-Saxon, and I do want the dice. Again, I don't generally love rune dice, but the weight and the feel of these, and that they are separated into the 8s, and then again 9, so they're using a D10 for the Anglo-Saxon extras, allows you to do a really beautiful sort of positional by the 8s that I explained before. Again, don't pay attention to this. This set just has 3 of the same dice. But when you when they're finished and completed, there will be an 8, one of the for each of the 8s, and then the 8s of the extra Anglo-Saxon rune, and the 9th one being the Gar rune, which stands at the center and powerful, and then they're just going to put a glyph or something onto that 10th space as a way of you to pulling that into the dice set as well, which I am really glad that they are doing. So again, really heavy. If you've ever played D&D with a metal set, it's plastic kind of feels meh after you roll dice with metal. There's just a satisfying thunk about them, and I actually prefer my rune sets to be metal or a very big or heavy wood, because I like the decisiveness of a cast with metal. So yeah, I am definitely going to pick these up because of that, and because they are in their sets of 8 like they are. So yeah, that's been that. So I hope that this look at the green Glyphs rune set, again, this will be 33 cards and 4 dice when it's all said and done. But this has been a look at it in its initial phase, which was just the Elder Futhark runes. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and it's been a joy to look at these cards with you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.